Would you live on $133 a month for food?
I should try it because you know how fabulous I'd look. I'd be so skinny. I mean, the camera adds 10 pounds. It really does. I would be looking great.
We really messed up. And we're all very sorry. I personally apologize to you that that happened.
I am the worst journalist in the world.
The White House soup of the day. My favorite radio guy in Fort Lauderdale, it's minestrone chicken sausage.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
Hey guys, I'm Abby Martin. Welcome to Breaking the Set. Do you guys remember the uproar over CISPA, the all-pervasive cybersecurity bill? You know, the one that would allow private companies to share the information they collect on you with the government. Well, believe it or not, CISPA is back. Yep, despite a White House veto on the bill the first time around, it's being introduced yet again. And the bill is just as invasive as ever before, which is why you and I need to make sure it doesn't pass its final vote in the House this week. But on a more somber note, there's a lot to be said about what happened in Boston this week and what's happened since. Tensions are high and emotions raw. And I couldn't help but think to myself while watching the coverage on the news that this kind of horror is what people experience on a daily basis in countries like Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq, much of which is at the hands of this government. In fact, on the same day as the Boston bombings, there was a wave of 17 bombings across Iraq that killed 33 people. Look, we need to start thinking globally and start understanding that every action is a correlation. Every human being is precious, and every loss of life tragic. So it's hard to take Obama seriously when he says things like this in response. Quote, "Any time bombs are used to target innocent civilians, it's an act of terror." Well, it seems like you just summed up your drone policy abroad, so maybe it's time to look in the mirror, Obama. The two deadly explosions set off near the finish line at the Boston Marathon on Monday have sent shockwaves across this country. At least 3 people were killed, including one 8-year-old boy, and over 140 people injured. However, since the tragedy, there have been countless knee-jerk reactions and baseless speculations circulating in the media world over the who, the what, and the why. See for yourself.
This is like a bomb explosion that we hear about in the news in Baghdad or Israel or some other tragic space in the world.
The materials used are incredibly commonplace, it seems. Pressure cookers, basic circuitry. The problem there, of course, is that commonplace objects, harder to track, and also, I think, do sort of effectively strike fear in the hearts of Americans because they're so ordinary. You know, if anybody can do this, who's to say that everybody won't?
No American citizen blows up random people. That's a Middle Eastern scene. That's not an American scene. When our crazies go off, they target the government.
What kind of explosives were used? So, for instance, if it was hydrogen peroxide, this is sort of a signature of Al-Qaeda. If it was more conventional explosives, which are much harder to get hold of now, that might be some other kind of right-wing extremist.
Yep, everything from a lone wolf jihadist to a right-wing extremist. And also, I don't think it's a great idea to outline the anarchist cookbook to millions of viewers on cable TV. The reactionary absurdity ranged from Alex Jones tweeting within 30 minutes that it was a false flag to Eric Rush, a Fox contributor who only hours after said that Muslims are evil and that, quote, we should kill them all. Yes, this is a public call to exterminate 1.6 billion people in retaliation for an attack perpetrated by a suspect whose identity remains completely unknown. But even though no actual facts have emerged about the attack in the past 2 days, it hasn't stopped the corporate media from airing around-the-clock coverage based entirely on speculation. It's so vile how these media corporations whore out tragedy. I mean, do we really need to see the bloody explosion in slow motion, frame by frame, a million times? Plus, all of this coverage is just filler in the place of real news. Guys, we're not learning anything. This is nothing more than disaster porn. These people are so desperate to report on any information that they end up jumping the gun and reporting false information time and time again. And this regurgitation is going on 24/7. Like this story from the New York Post, which reported within hours of the bombing that a Saudi man was in custody. And of course, every mainstream outlet ran with the story, just like they did today, when for the billionth time, when yet another breaking news story emerged across the mainstream, that there's a new suspect under arrest. Check it out.
One of the sources is a Boston law enforcement source who tells me that an arrest has been made in the investigation here in Boston.
So the suspect that was identified has now been arrested.
Fox News alert, and now it is being told to Fox News, to a Fox News reporter, that indeed an arrest has been made.
So what you're hearing from three separate sources is that no arrest, and they do not know the identity of the person. What do they have?
Where we just don't know what the case is, and I told the viewers from the beginning we were going to try to be transparent about the information coming in and how many sources we had on it and where it was coming from, and that's what we've done. And now we find ourselves at 2:27 p.m. Eastern Time, not knowing exactly whether an arrest has been made or not.
Yes, Megan, it's quite obvious that you know nothing. So I guess the moral of the story is to turn off the corporate news and wait until facts emerge that we can actually analyze. But of course, if we did that, we missed the next breaking story within the breaking news story. Because you see, over the last 24 hours, public officials, including the White House, have received letters containing the deadly poison ricin. Before you start getting flashbacks to the anthrax attacks in the wake of 9/11, remember this. The anthrax the U.S. government initially tried to link to Muslim extremists and later to Saddam Hussein ended up coming from the U.S. government's very own bioweapons lab. If there's any lesson learned here, it's that we shouldn't jump to conclusions. We should always question the claims that are made and question the way this attack will be manipulated by the establishment. A media that feeds us disinformation in times of strife is nothing but reactionary and irresponsible. This zeroing in on one tragedy for weeks on end whilst ignoring the terrorism sponsored by our own tax dollars around the world is the real disservice made to the American public. My heart goes out to the victims and all those affected. But let's take this chance to understand instead of react, because this non-stop news coverage doesn't just exemplify their laziness. It exposes their agenda, an agenda to sell war and to fearmonger the populace into submission, no matter what the facts are.
I want you to watch what we're about to do, because you've never seen anything like this on television.
The way of the world in Washington, D.C. is one where if you stand against the grain, then you stand alone, as was the case with Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, who served 6 terms representing the state of Georgia. Her vocal opposition to many establishment policies set her apart as a fearless trailblazer, and she's channeled that same dissent into her political activism ever since leaving office. She's done everything from running for president with the Green Party in 2008 to taking trips to Gaza to bring emergency aid to Palestinians. Well, earlier, I had the chance to speak to Congresswoman McKinney. I first asked her what her thoughts are looking back after getting smeared and gerrymandered out of office. And this is what she had to say.
It's funny you would start off with this, because this is exactly what I was thinking about myself. I recently wrote a piece about the soft repression that I continue to experience even up to right now. And as explained in the academic literature, soft repression consists of ridicule, stigma, and then finally silencing. When all else fails, then the person ceases to exist. So yes, it's not just that you raise an issue and you try and do the appropriate research, which is a responsible way to approach any issue, particularly if you're an elected official. And this is the kind of pushback you get from the special interests who don't want the truth to come out.
And as you've just outlined, I mean, it permeates for years and years after the propaganda machines at the height of the smearing, Cynthia, Congresswoman, rather. Let's go over some of the things that you did speak
about. You call me Cynthia, sure. And there's another example of it, too. Even after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was dead, and now because of a jury decision in December of 1999 in Memphis, Tennessee, we know that the jury decided that the evidence was overwhelming, that the United States government itself participated in a conspiracy to kill Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And guess what? That did not end the smearing. The smearing continued well after he was dead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's still ridiculed and mocked as a conspiracy theory. I mean, this is declassified documents that have led to this civil suit that you're talking about that have overwhelmingly confirmed. It was a unanimous decision from over 70 eyewitnesses who testified there. And let's go over some of the things that you did speak out on when you were in office. I love this clip. I remember you grilling Rumsfeld on the House floor in 2005 over a number of issues. I wanted to play one, which was regarding DynCorp and child trafficking. Let's take a look at that.
The president called for the punishment of those involved in this horrible business. But at the very moment of that speech, DynCorp was exposed for having been involved in the buying and selling of young women and children. Mr. Secretary, is it policy of the U.S. government to reward companies that traffic in women and little girls?
So after, that was years ago. And then I see an article like this, Cynthia, where it says foreign contractors hired Afghan dancing boys, according to WikiLeaks. I mean, this is well after you had already addressed it. And I just saw on DynCorp's website, they were just awarded a $20 million contract. I mean, this is on top of the slew of criminal activity we already know that these military contractors are responsible for. Why is the government still allowing this to happen and covering it up?
Well, Donald Rumsfeld's response was that, companies, are allowed to get out of the penalty box. But as I pointed out to him, DynCorp was never in the penalty box. And so we've got these military contractors who are former generals and big shots, foreign policy gurus, military gurus, who are, and of course, political insiders who own or head these organizations, these companies, and they are able to act with impunity using taxpayers' dollars. And so it's about time that the people of the United States say, not in our name, not with our tax dollars. And we will demand of our members of Congress that they hold these organizations accountable, but it hasn't happened yet.
Well, if you like what you see so far, check us out on Hulu at hulu.com/BreakingTheSet. There you can watch the latest episode of Breaking the Set, like Mondays, which featured my interview with sex and relationship expert Connor Habib. You can also scroll through and watch every episode since the middle of December. So go and favorite us, comment on how we're doing at hulu.com/BreakingTheSet. I'll take a break from my preaching for now, but stay tuned to hear more of my interview with former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney next.
I got news for you, gang. The world is round, not flat.
With more Texas breaking news. U.S. casualties in Iraq.
That's my kid. Don't tell me how much time I spent helping. And the Prime Minister using no foreign aid whatsoever. Watch what happens. And coming up next.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
Now let's hear more from former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. I wanted to play yet another portion from that same clip that you grilled him about 9/11 war games. Let's take a look at that.
The question was, we had 4 war games going on September 11th, and the question that I tried to pose before the secretary had to go to lunch was whether or not the activities of the 4 war games going on September 11th actually impaired our ability to respond to the attacks.
So, Cynthia, the general, of course, followed up saying it didn't impair their ability, it enhanced their ability. I mean, when I saw this clip when I was younger, I was like, who is this woman? I love her. I mean, why do you think that the war games were an important aspect of 9/11?
There were many researchers, independent researchers, citizen researchers who had begun to try and delve into the facts around September 11th, because clearly we were not getting any kind of factual accounting from the Bush administration. And I was in contact with them. The leading one, of course, was Michael Rupert, who eventually went on to write the book Crossing the Rubicon, where he spelled everything out and, you know, sort of pinned the blame on the Cheney operation out of the White House. And now there was a mistake, though, that I made. And the mistake was that I specified that there were 4 war games going on, because now we know that there were far more war games going on. And one of the ways that we found that out was when the secretary responded with the names of the war games. There were 2 additional names that nobody knew about, none of the researchers knew about. So now we know that there were 6, 7, who knows how many war games going on. That, in my mind, is a clear indication that something untoward was happening on September 11th. And that's why I followed up that question, was September 11th a special security event? Was it designated as a special security event prior to the events of September 11th? And of course, the answer came back that it had not been so designated. But the war games, I mean, you know, the war games was only one aspect of getting through to Secretary Rumsfeld, that there was at least one member on the House Armed Services Committee who was paying attention to what they said. And, you know, but the value that, as I think back on it, of me being there and being able to put these things on the record was that I did the same thing. I was equal opportunity, you know. So I did it. I asked penetrating questions of Madeleine Albright when she was Secretary of State. I asked the same penetrating questions of Colin Powell when he was Secretary of State, because the bottom line is that we live in a republic, and the people whom we vote for and elect have a responsibility to represent our interests and our values. And that's what I tried to do every day that I was on Capitol Hill.
Well, Donald Rumsfeld deflected all of your questions, but they were very important, Cynthia. I mean, this is particularly one of the most important aspects of 9/11, because why would they have all these war games scheduled that took the fighters far away from where they were supposed to be stationed in order to respond effectively to these attacks, which they're trained to do? So it is a very, very crucial aspect, and I'm really happy that you got to confront him about that. You also asked him about the $2.3 trillion missing from the Pentagon that he announced on the day before 9/11, of course, was forgot about completely after that event. You've been on multiple aid missions to Gaza after leaving office. I mean, a boat that you were on actually got seized and you ended up in an Israeli jail. Why is this sort of radical action necessary?
I'm glad you posed the question in the way that you posed it. It is necessary because the situation has come so far, so unhinged, that in the everyday affairs of the U.S. government now, we cannot assume that the Bill of Rights applies to us. That's why it was so important for me to participate in the Liberty Fest that recently took place in Atlanta, because this idea, this cherished notion of liberty is literally at risk. And why? Well, George Bush pinned everything, all of the rolling of the war machine was because of September 11th. And then after George W. Bush, Barack Obama says that, you know, we have to kill people all over the planet because of September 11th. And so if we don't get to really the heart of the operation of our government and what our government is doing in our name with our tax dollars, then I am one of the first ones to say, sadly, that the Constitution will mean nothing, the Bill of Rights will mean nothing, rule of law will mean nothing, and we're getting closer to that point every day. If you can just imagine how far along on the political spectrum we've come, when you have the Republican president leaving office, Dwight Eisenhower warning the people about the military-industrial complex, and you have Barack Obama, a Democratic president, actually advocating cutting Social Security and Medicare, which constitute the social safety net for our seniors.
I wanted to ask you one more question about Palestine, since you've been such a fervent activist for the Palestinian cause. Of course, in the U.S., we don't even acknowledge what our tax dollars are funding in terms of this apartheid state. Do you think that there's even a chance, until we see world pressures such as what we saw with South African apartheid, to end the Israeli apartheid? I mean, is there even a chance without that kind of pressure to end what's going on?
Well, that kind of pressure actually is building and mounting today. I was honored to be asked to serve as a juror on the Bertrand Russell Tribunal on Palestine. And we actually traveled to Cape Town, South Africa, so that we could investigate and hear from South Africans about their experience in apartheid, and then also hear from Israelis, both Jewish and Arab, and also the Palestinians in the West Bank and the occupied. They wouldn't allow a representative from Gaza to come. But we were able to hear what their treatment like, what their day-to-day activities are like. And the South Africans said that the Palestinian experience, and they said this on the record, is worse than what they experienced under apartheid. And so apartheid now is an international crime. And that's why the government of Israel has steadfastly opposed, like, for example, when President Jimmy Carter wrote the book, Palestine Not Apartheid, or Apartheid Not Palestine, or something like that.
Peace, not apartheid.
Peace, not apartheid. That they came down so hard on President Carter because they didn't want the association to be made. As a result, now the Bertrand Russell Tribunal on Palestine has gone on record and said, yes, while the features of apartheid in Palestine are significantly different from the features of apartheid in South Africa, the practices of Israel with respect to the Palestinians, whether they are inside Israel or inside the occupied territories, do constitute a legal breach, and that legal breach is apartheid. So now it's very clear that Israel is an apartheid state. And the recommendation coming from the Bertrand Tribunal on Palestine was that the BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions regime that was engaged in by civil society with respect to South Africa, and that eventually helped to bring apartheid down in South Africa, should be engaged vigorously with respect to Israel as well, and Israeli practices against the Palestinians. I'm very pleased and proud and really honored to have been able to serve as a juror on that tribunal.
Well, anyone who's standing on the side of Israel in this situation is standing on the wrong side of history, frankly. I mean, people in this country really need to wake up, because as long as the U.S. is allowing this violation of international law, I don't really see Israel changing its ways, Congresswoman. And I wanted to move on to just this whole rebranding of the war on terror. You mentioned Obama's kind of inheriting of Bush's whole policy of the war on terror. Of course, now we're seeing drone bombings instead of ground troops. Now we're seeing these interventions under the cloak of NATO, humanitarian interventions with Libya. Why do you think, or what do you think it will take to really get a new anti-war opposition to these new actions? Because, of course, we didn't really see that in terms of Libya, and now we're seeing really strong rhetoric about Syria.
Well, first of all, we've got to get the false actors and the pretenders out of the peace movement, because they are there to hinder the peace movement, not to promote it. One of the things that I found in my reading, in my schoolwork reading, was the origin of this war on terror, which is very interesting because when Israel carried out a targeted assassination and they ended up killing the wrong person, and after that, the international outcry was so huge, they ended up killing an innocent doctor. And so the outcry was so huge that the administration sent former Senator George Mitchell to Israel to specifically tell Israel not to use the words war on terror, because that was what Israel was using to justify its policy of targeted assassination. That's where we get the war on terror. Now it's common usage, it's common parlance, and I believe this was Israel's response to George Mitchell, to his mission, and that was to make sure that the whole world used the language war on terror, which now, of course, it is.
And it's a very dangerous language indeed, Congresswoman, because it's perpetual. It's never ending. You're fighting a war against a tactic. I mean, it's completely insane. Let's talk about Hugo Chavez, since you're about to go on this speaking tour. You were in Venezuela immediately in the wake of his death. What do you think about the media portrayal in the aftermath of his death, mocking people mourning him, versus what we're seeing in the wake of Margaret Thatcher's?
Just to look at Wolf Blitzer and CNN and the Fox Friends, and, you know, I cannot stomach them because of the blather that they serve. Unfortunately, that blather is being eaten and consumed by the vast majority of the people in the United States. But a significant number of people, an increasing number of people, are abandoning cable television because what they're getting is distraction and disinformation. They're getting anything except information, news, and empowerment. They're not getting that.
That was former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. And I'm happy she's turned off the corporate news, because if we don't tune them out, then we can't tune the truth in. You know, it's a shame that all the honest representatives get phased out one by one. Speaking truth to power may not be a popular move, but it's the right move, and more people need to step up.